Picture this. It's the 1860s, and America is racing to stitch itself together with steel tracks. Explosives echo in the mountains. Men cling to cliffs with ropes, hammering holes into granite. But here's the twist: when the job was finally done, the very workers who built it weren't even invited to the celebration. Their names forgotten, their faces erased. Who are these people? And why has their story been buried for over 150 years? Today, we're digging into the hidden history of immigrant rail workers in America. And I promise you, by the end, you'll never look at a train the same way again. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is where we tell the forgotten stories that shape the world we live in. And today's story? It's about sweat, sacrifice, and the silent army of immigrants who built America's railroads. Stick with me to the very end, because we'll uncover not only what they built, but also why their story was erased and how it still impacts the way we think about immigration today. America in the mid-1800s was expanding westward after the Louisiana Purchase and the California Gold Rush, but the land was massive weeks of travel across rough trails. Imagine if Amazon delivery took months. That's how slow things were. The government and private companies knew railroads were the future. Most Americans didn't want to do the brutal labor. It paid little, was dangerous, and offered no status. Enter immigrants, desperate for opportunity, willing to do the jobs others avoided. But why risk your life for a railroad job that paid pennies? The answer depends on where you came from, and the stories are as heartbreaking as they are inspiring. Imagine you're Patrick O'Reilly, fresh off the boat, starving but hopeful. You take a job laying track through Pennsylvania. Every morning, you face blasting powder, collapsing tunnels, and the constant threat of death. And yet, the alternative starvation feels worse. Irish were mocked in newspapers, with cartoons portraying them as less than human. Yet they kept the East Coast rail network expanding. But while Irish workers were risking dynamite in the East, out west, a different group would face even more extreme conditions. And their story is one of the most remarkable in labor history. The Chinese railroad workers. Recruited in the 1860s by the Central Pacific Railroad to build the western half of the transcontinental line. At first, supervisors doubted them. But when they proved to be hardworking, disciplined, and reliable, thousands more were recruited, over 12,000 in total. One winter, avalanches buried entire camps, wiping out dozens of workers overnight. Yet by spring, survivors were back at it, digging, blasting, laying track. In 1867, thousands staged a strike for equal pay and shorter hours. The company cut off food and supplies until they returned to work. And after all this sacrifice, you'd think they'd be honored when the railroad was complete. But wait until you hear what happened at the famous Golden Spike ceremony. Mexican railroad workers. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, Mexican immigrants called trackeros became the backbone of rail maintenance. They laid track in blistering heat across Texas, Arizona, California. Paid the lowest wages, often working seasonally and living in boxcars provided by the company. A Mexican worker might spend 10 hours under the desert sun, hammering spikes, only to return to a wooden boxcar with no running water, where his family also slept. But Mexican workers weren't the only group holding the railroads together. Another group had already faced centuries of oppression and now found themselves on the tracks again: African American workers. After the Civil War, many freedmen sought work. Railroads hired them as track layers, porters, and maintenance crews. They were often segregated into the lowest paying positions. Some became Pullman porters, traveling the country, but under strict rules and poor conditions. A former slave might lay tracks in Mississippi, only to be ordered into a separate rail car when the train passed through town. The irony was cruel. They built the tracks but couldn't ride them equally. But the real heartbreak? When the golden moment of triumph came in 1869, Almost none of these immigrant or black workers were acknowledged. Why their story was buried. Racial prejudice, honoring immigrants clashed with the idea of American progress. Political pressure. Immigrants were seen as cheap labor, not heroes. Historical narrative favored executives and inventors over workers. This isn't just about railroads. It's about who gets remembered and who gets erased. When nations tell their stories. And here's the question I'll leave you with. What would America look like today if those immigrants had refused to work on the rails? Railroads shaped modern America, trade, migration, communication. Without immigrants, expansion would have been decades slower, maybe impossible. Their story connects to today's immigration debates. The next time you hear a train whistle, remember, those tracks carry more than steel and wood. They carry the echoes of Irish blasting through rock, Chinese workers clinging to cliffs, Mexican trackeros sweating in the sun, and African American freedmen laying down ties. They may not be in the history books, but they're in the foundation of America itself. If you found this story as powerful as I did, hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more untold stories. Trust me, what we have coming next will surprise you even more. See you in the next one.